And I did. I came over here for the weekend. I wound up staying here for 2 weeks. And I said, I will go no farther.
Ken Booth is far from his childhood home of Rayville, Louisiana. He's put down roots in the desert sands of Yuma, Arizona.
The desert, I love the desert. The desert is an everyday new adventure.
At the foot of the Gia Mountains, Booth can still be found digging up dirt and searching for truth, using the internet and social media as a vehicle for his stories. But for some 25 years, he did investigative reporting for KNOE TV. Working in TV is something Ken never intended to do. He was a radio newsman. But in the late 70s, Governor James A. KNOE, and owner of KNOE, pursued him.
And I refused him at every turn. He even drove out to meet my mother and daddy, who he knew them, and out to the farmhouse outside of Rayville to convince them, to convince me to come work at KNOE.
Booth, doing news at Keel Radio in Shreveport, finally told Mr. KNOE he'd come for a visit. By the time they agreed on a date, Governor KNOE was in the hospital. The two talked on the phone after Booth toured the station and met with then General Manager Paul Goldman.
Well, it was a bad phone call, but 2 hours later, he died. And Jimmy Jr. picked up the slack.
Booth brought incredible credibility to KNOE. He traveled the globe covering presidents. Even Ronald Reagan personally corresponded with him. This reporter never gave up on a story. He had a relentless desire to uncover wrongdoing.
What they never learned was, by the time when I went to see him and knocked on that door, it was way too late, because I already had the documentation with me.
For Ken, his fondest memories of his time at KNOE weren't necessarily his stories that led to indictments of white-collar criminals, but the people that he called colleagues and friends, like longtime news photographer Jack Deatley.
That series we did, I liked that. Of course, that brought me home and lit my fire. And we did a lot of that stuff down on the border. Just little things like that, I guess I remember.
I would consider him the greatest mentor that I've ever had. Between him and John Dennison, those are probably the best too, as far as journalism is concerned and television news.
He even recalls the day he offered yours truly a job in 1981 when I was just a sophomore at ULM majoring in radio TV management.
You came in, I think it was Leslie Stahl you wanted to be. I intend to be Leslie Stahl. You're hired. Gerald, get in here and sign her up.
And I'm forever grateful. This powerhouse reporter became my mentor and first boss. His advice for any journalist wanting to follow in his footsteps: be ready to dig.
You're going to spend a lot of dull time going through books and papers and chasing this out of the basement of the courthouse and all that kind of business. That's the way you do it. And when you get through with it, then you know you got something. Then you can say, got you.